So continuing our series on Omega level mutants, we pick up now with Stryfe. Now in the realm of Marvel Comics, for those of you guys who don't know, Stryfe is what we call a heavy hitter. He is a big deal. He has not appeared as frequently as other big deals like Apocalypse or Magneto or somebody like that, but he is still a force to be reckoned with. The reason for this is that Stryfe and Cable actually go hand in hand. Their origins, their stories are basically two halves of the same coin. And to wind back for a second, I have a full explanation on Cable's origin, which you guys are welcome to check out. The link will be in the description. But the long and short of it was that Cable was born to Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor. And when he was born, Apocalypse woke up realizing that Cable had immense power. And this was important because Apocalypse's powers burned out his bodies, and so he had to basically jump from human host to human host. Well, with Cable, with Nathan, he wouldn't have to do that. Nathan was so powerful that he would be able to withstand the powers of Apocalypse. And so Apocalypse kidnapped Cable, took him to a ship, and infected him with a techno-organic virus, which is a virus that converts living tissue to machinery. And the reason why Apocalypse did this is because in his mind, if Cable could withstand the experience of being exposed to the techno-organic virus and survive, then that would mean that Cable is capable of being Apocalypse's host. He can basically withstand anything. And so the X-Men, X-Factor, these various groups got together and they fought off Apocalypse and they managed to save Nathan. But the problem is that Nathan's exposure to the techno-organic virus seemed irreversible. And so Nathan was sent to the future and he was raised by Jean Grey and Scott Summers, and he was effectively taught, how to be a superhero. Well, the issue with this was that when Nathan was first taken to the future, because he was infected with a techno-organic virus, the idea was that it may be incurable. And because it's incurable, because there's nothing they can do, they decided to clone Cable. Well, because this future was ruled by Apocalypse, when Cable arrived in this timeline, Apocalypse saw him as the child that he was unable to capture in the past. And so Apocalypse sent his forces to capture Cable, and instead of actually capturing the real Cable, Apocalypse's forces captured the clone. And so this clone is Stryfe. Now, the reason why Stryfe is a bad guy is because under the control of Apocalypse, Stryfe's negativity, his anger, his rage, that was all encouraged. It was all driven to the surface as opposed to being suppressed in light of superhero tendencies. And so while Cable grew up to be a superhero under the leadership of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, Stryfe grew up to be a villain under the control of Apocalypse. Now, while both Cable and Stryfe never really knew the relation to one another, they never really knew their origins, this came to a head when the two of them began fighting one another. And the reason for this was that Apocalypse was killed. At some point in the future, Apocalypse was defeated and officially cast off. He was no longer part of the Marvel landscape, and Stryfe rose up to take his place. And so Cable formed a group called the New Canaanites, and Stryfe formed a group called the Clan Chosen. And they basically fought one another time and time again. This went on for decades. Now, eventually a peace treaty was signed. This issue came to an end. Stryfe wouldn't let it go. Stryfe refused to accept defeat. And so what he did is he basically used the time machine that belonged to the Clan Chosen and traveled back to the 20th century. This brings us to the first introduction of Stryfe in Marvel Comics. Now, when he first appeared, he had a couple of cameos here and there, and he showed up in maybe some small story arcs, but the first grand poobah in your face, here are the things that Stryfe can do storyline came with Executioner Song. An Executioner Song was basically Stryfe making his move to eliminate Cable. He attacked Charles Xavier, he attacked the X-Men, he attacked virtually everybody. But the big cue about Stryfe being as powerful as he is came during the Executioner Song story when he kidnapped Jean Grey and Scott Summers and shut off their ability to use their powers. Now, this is a very big deal because with Cyclops, it's not that hard. His eyes are portals, he can shoot lasers out of them. It's a really cool concept. With Jean Grey, she was a host for the Phoenix Force, but even without the Phoenix Force, she's still a wildly powerful telepath. And so this tells us just how powerful Stryfe is in relation to Jean Grey. Now, the reason why Stryfe is so powerful is because unlike Cable, Stryfe was not exposed to the techno-organic virus. And so where Cable has to use his telepathy and telekinesis to keep the virus from taking over his body, Stryfe doesn't have to. Stryfe's powers were just allowed to grow to their fruition. They were allowed to grow to their full potential. And so Stryfe basically begins a series of campaigns. Now, the problem with this is that Stryfe following the Executioner's song, had a lot of minor appearances. He showed up here and there in a couple stories, but Marvel never really did anything with him. And the reason for this was because in the 1990s, it was high-octane, fast-paced stories. You know, in the 2000s, Joe Quesada was running the show, and so he wanted classic Marvel, and that meant that characters like Stryfe had to take a back seat. Now, all this changed after the House of M, and the House of M was a story where the Scarlet Witch had warped reality and changed the lives of everybody. But when the House of M was corrected, she set things back to normal, but stripped 98% of the mutant population of their powers. Now, while there were a lot of things that were going on after the House of M event, the two things that we really need to worry about, or really the only one thing we need to worry about, is what's called Messiah War. And this is what dealt with the reintroduction of Stryfe into Marvel Comics. Now, he had been resurrected, but there was some continuity issues, things that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And in order to keep this from being too confusing, I'm gonna go ahead and leave all that stuff out. But what ends up happening is that after the events of House of M, a girl named Hope Summers is born. And Hope is the first mutant born since the conclusion of House of M. And so it's a very big deal. There's all kinds of prophecies about her and different things like that. Well, a notable character in this is Bishop. And all we had known about Bishop up to this point was that he hailed from a future that was similar to Days of Future Past. But we never found out what happened that caused that future to take place. And what we learn is that in Bishop's timeline, Hope Summers killed 1 million humans. And so what Bishop intends to do is kill Hope Summers. Now, Cable steps in and Cable takes Hope Summers. They start jumping through the time stream and Bishop follows them. But because Cable and Hope are sort of on their own, all these roads start intertwining and start coming into the fray. Cyclops sends the Uncanny X-Force team of Wolverine and Warpath and so on and so forth, sends all them into the future to chase after Cable and to keep both him and Hope Summers protected. But what happens is along the line, Bishop runs into Stryfe in the future. Now, as far as I know, we don't know why Stryfe is there. He's just there. He's just a person in this timeline. And so what ends up happening is Bishop helps Stryfe take over the world so that Stryfe will help Bishop with his own goals. But Bishop doesn't really say what these are, he just says he'll ask for Stryfe's help eventually. And so what happens is because Cable and Hope Summers are living in this time period where Stryfe rules the world, eventually Stryfe becomes aware of the fact that they're there. And so Stryfe sends out his forces and he and Cable begin to battle one another. Well, at the same time, because Bishop and Stryfe had attacked Apocalypse in his rejuvenation chamber and tried to kill him, it turned out Apocalypse didn't die. And so at the end of this great big story arc, you basically have Cable and Hope Summers and Uncanny X-Force and Apocalypse and Archangel all fighting against Stryfe and Bishop. And even Bishop turns on Stryfe, and this is the real cue about how powerful Stryfe is. Stryfe takes all of them on by himself. Every last one of them takes every single person. He takes on Uncanny X-Force, he takes on Apocalypse, he takes on Cable, he takes on Hope, or at least what little Hope can do. He takes on Apocalypse, all of them at the exact same time. And this is a testament to just how powerful Stryfe is. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Let's get into the powers of Stryfe. What all can he do? Well, because Stryfe is an Omega level mutant, specifically an Omega level telepath and telekinetic, what this means is that there's no limit to the things he can do. This is what differentiates an Omega level mutant from a non-Omega level mutant. A non-Omega level mutant, like an Alpha level mutant, is someone who has telepathy, but they've basically just reached a plateau. They've reached a point where their powers just can't go any higher. They can't read any more minds than they already have. They can only read the minds of everybody in the world, like Charles Xavier, but they can't read the minds of like everybody in the universe. And so Stryfe does not have that problem. There is no limit to what Stryfe can do. And so he has all the powers of your regular telepath, but they go beyond anything those telepaths can do. So he's much like Nate Gray from the Age of Apocalypse storyline, which again, I have a video on him that you're welcome to check out, in the sense that Stryfe can basically create holograms using his mind and manipulating various molecules around him. He can control the minds of others. He can trap people in their own minds. He can read minds of multiple people at the same time. He can control huge groups of people at the same time. He can do all kinds of cool stuff. But the really cool element of this is his telekinesis. Because there's no limit to what it is that he's capable of, again, he's much like Nate Gray. Because everything in the Marvel Universe consists of atoms, which make up molecules and so on and so forth, with telekinesis, assuming that he was able to achieve some measure of cosmic awareness, which is entirely possible, Stryfe would be able to manipulate the atoms of matter itself and effectively control reality. Now, this has never happened in Marvel Comics, and there's no indication that it ever will, especially with all new, all different Marvel kind of rebooting everything and the fact that Stryfe is nowhere to be seen. But the fact remains here that this is entirely possible for his character. This is why he's such a powerful individual, because there's no limit to what it is that he can do with regards to the ability to control objects using his mind and manipulate objects using telekinesis. with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you guys think, and yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.